Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 97 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I got Joe Meade with me. And Joe, we're back for season 4. Today, we're going to be doing our college football preview here in the Big Ten, and we're going to be throwing the teams in our first power rankings. But it's been a summer, and we're back doing some more Nutshell this year. So, Joe, we're going to go to Illinois. They're first in our power rankings alphabetical order. The viewers can see the schedule there, and then our power rankings on the right. You'll see me fill that out as we're going here. We are going to set a 7-minute timer for each team so we don't yap about one team too long. Timer starts. Joe, Illinois, Brett Bielema on the clock here. 10-3 last year. Seemed like a big step for the Fighting Illini. Luke Altmaier is back. Trying to build off that 10-3. It seems to me that expectations for the Illini are to at least have a shot at the college football playoff coming down the stretch.
Yeah, Sean. I think the over/under win total is like 8.5.
It's a little low.
Yeah, I think it's a little low, and I think a lot of people are comparing Illinois. That's kind of everyone's dark horse, sexy pick for the conference, and I'll get into mine later. It's not Illinois, but I do think Illinois will certainly be very good. The big reason is, Sean, they have the highest returning production from 2024, 75%. It seems like everyone is back. Clearly going to miss Bryant, the receiver. But, Brett Bielema, when people forget about him, I think it's so silly that people will use his Arkansas tenure against him. This is a guy who, from the mid 2000s to the early 2010s, who did really well in the conference. Wisconsin was always in Indianapolis with him, uh, in tons of Rose Bowls and marquee bowl games. This is a guy that knows his conference and is kind of timeless there. And, as much as we've had great coaches in the conference, from Urban Meyer to Jim Harbaugh, Mark D'Antonio, this is a guy I'd put up there. Certainly Wisconsin and Illinois aren't going to win national titles, I don't think. But this is a guy who gets them to the very doorstep of it. So I think, coaching, quarterback play, returning production, I think none of that's really a question. My big question for Illinois is going to be, can they work this schedule? I think the Duke game will be a little challenging. I don't love the fact they play at Indiana. Certainly playing at. I think this is their key stretch here. Ohio State, October 11th, at Washington, October 25th. Good to have the bye week, and then at Wisconsin, the second to last week of the year. I think there are workable games in that stretch. Uh, I do think 9-3 again is on the table, but it wouldn't stun me if Illini went 10-2. I'm not going to say they're going to beat Ohio State. I know a lot of people want kind of want that to happen or make that their bold prediction per se. Don't think they have the horses for that. But in terms of experience, coaching, and line play, it's hard to think Illinois is going to underperform that 8.5. I'd safely say they go 8-4 at worst, and then probably a ceiling at 10-2.
Yeah, you pretty much went through it. They probably will play. We were not gonna spoil it, but the two teams at the bottom of the league, they're probably playing. That should be maybe 3 if you want to include the team at the bottom there. But obviously Ohio State at home, Indiana on the road, Duke on the road, Washington on the road are the 4 games for me. I think looking at this schedule, obviously not knowing how the teams end up, the teams that they're playing, it seems like they probably have to get to 10 wins to get to the college football playoff, unless they were to beat one of the ranked teams, and then they go on to have good seasons. But not out of the question for me. I think they'll be in the top 25 for most of the year or all of it, and if the cards fall the right direction for the Illini, I could see them getting in at the very end of the college football playoff. But it seems to me that their ceiling might be the 11th or 12th best team in the country.
Yeah, and certainly I don't think there's anything wrong with just missing out on the playoff. I kind of call it the Washington Commanders theory. Everyone in the NFL is trying to create these bold predictions for the Commanders, and I'm kind of applying it to Illinois. They certainly outperformed expectations last year. If Illinois goes 9-3 or 10-3 again this year, I certainly don't think it's a bad season. And even 8-4, I think that at Indiana, Ohio State, at Washington, uh, I'm just going to spoil it now. I think that's why I'm going to predict them to be 9-3. I don't see them winning any of those games, but I see them taking care of business in all their other ones. And I wouldn't be surprised if they went 10-2. I'm just not gonna be the guy to make that proclamation right now. Sean, one thing I will say is Brett Bielema constantly outperforms expectations, even in his early 2021 winning at Penn State. 2022, I know they struggled with injuries and they kind of dreaded into November of 22. But this is a guy I'm not going to question. So if he went 10-2 this year, certainly don't color me surprised. I really think with that returning production that they're going to be an absolute wagon to play. Whether that's certainly a bottom feeder team like two or three they're playing, but also for the Ohio States, for the Washingtons and the Indianas, who are kind of more like that 4-8 range in what I consider for this Big Ten conference. But Sean, is there anything else you'd like to add before we give our power ranking for Illinois?
Yeah, I just think they're probably one of the teams that you'd want to have tougher games early. You know, a lot of these newer teams with a bunch of new players, new coaches, you know, perhaps want their tougher games at the end of the schedule. But Joe, they're probably going to be favored in their last 4 games for sure, and maybe even their last 5. So if they pick off a big win early, I could see them sort of cruising at the end. But with all that returning production, their 3 toughest games are probably in their first 6. So win one, maybe 2 of those, and they're going to be set. But you know, if you're 3-3 going to Washington, it's not going to be all that fun. So, Joe, I'll start off with Illinois here in the power rankings. I've got them 6th in the league.
God, I only have the one above you at 5. Interested to see how this shakes out. Obviously, one of 18 teams done now, but I do think Illinois, even at a 9-3, depending on how an 8-4 goes, I think it would be a successful season. And then anything on top of that, I think is just house money for the Illini. So, yeah, that's one team down, Sean, and now 17 to go.
All right, pretty good timing there. Just under 6 minutes. We're going to go down the list to my Indiana Hoosiers last year. Sort of the Cinderella of the entire sport, finishing 11-1 in the regular season and then losing to Notre Dame in the college football playoff. Joe, Indiana returns a ton of production too. They get back Mikhail Kamara. They get back Elijah Surratt. A number of other transfer portal ads like their quarterback Fernando Mendoza from California. How do you see year 2 shaking out for Sig and the Hoosiers?
I see it shaking out pretty well, Sean, and I'm gonna kind of I'm just gonna call it the Commanders Illinois theory now. I think just because last year massively, getting to 11-1, I don't think that should guide people to expect that. I think their win total is 8.5, similar to Illinois. So I really like the returning production. They've got 62% from what I gather. And Elijah Surratt, I think they upgraded quarterback with Mendoza, the Cal transfer, and that's not to knock Curtis Rourke because he was, I thought, fantastic and did his job very well in most games. I think they upgraded Mendoza. The one thing I don't love about Indiana in terms of return to the college football playoff, I think the schedule last year, and this isn't to take away anything from Signetti or the team, it was a admittedly soft schedule. I don't think Indiana would have a similar record if they played a schedule that was less favorable. So I don't let I think the whiteout game at Penn State or probably stripe out whatever that game is going to end up being is probably a loss there, Sean. I think the big weakness they have isn't. I think they have top tier talent. Surratt, the defense, Mendoza, Hemby. I don't question their top talent. I think depth is going to be an issue for this team as they get banged up throughout the year. I think that could be something that comes back to bite them. And I'm judging them on an unfair standard. I'm judging them on a typical Indiana football standard. I'm judging them now on a team that's been to the playoff, a team that could probably win 9, 10 games most years is what people are expecting now. I think that Illinois game is going to be big for both. It's going to be huge for both the teams we just talked about. And it's really interesting, Sean. They're probably hardest stretches early on in late September to October. Illinois at Iowa. Presumably that game could be a 3:30 or 2:30 look or a night kickoff. At Oregon, they do have the bye in between, but If they win two of those three, even one of those three, they might have something going, but it might force them to win that late game at Penn State, who a lot of people are seeing as national title favorites. So I think kind of similar to Illinois, if they could get through that stretch, maybe win two of those three games, not drop a game that, as of now, not knowing how this shakes out, they could be playing Penn State with one loss, kind of with house money, and maybe a chance to, for the first time, have the Hoosiers go to Indianapolis. Purdue, as much as we'll probably knock them later, has been to Indy. That's something the Hoosiers haven't done. And I know the Big Ten title game, you could say it's devalued. I think that's certainly something Indiana can achieve. And if they win two of those three early games in that Illinois, Iowa, at Oregon stretch, maybe that Penn State game's for a spot in the Big Ten title game. Who knows?
It's going to be a very interesting start to the year. They've got to be ready. They've got just about the softest FCS non-conference you can get, but the table turns really quickly. I mean, those are three games that Indiana will probably be favored in two of them, but very slightly in the first two. At Iowa, home against Illinois, I mean, that's, better be ready for that. And I do think I think 2 out of 3 there should be the goal. I think they can get to the college football playoff with 2 losses, depending on everything, how it shakes out. But this team's strength last year was beating teams by a lot that they should have. There's a couple of those on the schedule, but there's probably 1 or 2 tougher games this year rather than just really the one in the regular season last year. They got a little bit lucky with, got Michigan in a down year, got, UCLA.
Washington, too.
Got Washington in a down
yeah.
year, got Nebraska they weren't as good as people thought. So definitely tougher this year, but gotta beat Illinois to get to the playoff, I think. But I think the roster's really good. I think it might even be better than last year. Rourke obviously came out after the season. He was basically playing the entire year on one knee. And not that he would have been such a running threat anyway, but, Mendoza's being mocked in the top 3 rounds of the NFL draft. So it's possible that there is an upgrade in some positions that were pretty good last year. But, Joe, time is almost up here. So where do you got the Hoosiers?
Yeah, to put a record prediction on, we're not gonna go game by game, so it might not be as organized as some of the other college football channels that you watch. But I think Indiana hits the over. I think we're 2 for 2 on overs. I think they get to 9 wins. I think the Penn State Oregon games, I don't see them pulling out. I do think one of these at Iowa games, and not to criticize Signetti, I think one of these teams, whether it's a Michigan State or someone, steps up and they might lose a game they're not supposed to. But I think 9-3 is really good. I think that's also acceptable for the Hoosiers. And in terms of power ranking shots, I have the Hoosiers at 7.
Okay, not all that different. I've got them 1 spot ahead of Illinois in 5th. All right, let's turn the page down to Iowa. The 3 eyes out of the way quickly. Iowa coming off of a disappointing year last year. They end up winning a number of games more than they probably deserved. But Joe, Kirk Ferentz is still the coach there. They do bring in Gronowski, the South Dakota State transfer, to be quarterback. He's won 2 FCS titles there. Do you expect anything different from the typical Iowa Hawkeyes experience?
Yeah, I think the defense, you still have Phil Parker. I think as long as they have him, I know that defense is going to be stout. I think Tim Lester did a pretty commendable job. I think people who expected this to be a massive upgrade based on the personnel, I know they lose Caleb Johnson, so I don't want to get attacked in my Instagram comments. I'm aware of that. I think Gronowski's an upgrade. I think Lester year 2 in the system will progress the offense forward. The one thing, Sean, that's just kind of not really a cloud, but kind of been the inevitable question for Iowa the last few years is this going to be Ferrett's last year? I think, he's getting up there in age. I'm not trying to speculate that I know something the public doesn't. I just think, he's always the popular pick, and, sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire. Sean, I believe their over-under is 8.5 again, or am I losing my mind?
That's what I saw last.
Yeah, 8.5 for the Hawkeyes. It's funny. Iowa, typically finishes anywhere from like 7 to 10 wins. So the fact that Dak spat in the middle is not really shocking to me. One thing I will say about Iowa, I think their schedule last year early on was extremely difficult. Going to the national champion Ohio State Buckeyes first week of October. At least they don't have that this year. They do have their two toughest opponents, Oregon and Penn State, in Iowa City. I bet one of those is a night game. And if you know anything about this conference, Iowa night game, top five, top 10 teams usually either go to die there or usually escape by the hair of their like by the skin of their teeth or whatever the expression is. So I think the early on game at Iowa State, who just did win today to open the year, is going to be a great litmus test. I don't expect them to win that, unfortunately, for the Hawkeyes, but I do think I do think they can get to 9 wins. I don't love that they play Oregon and Penn State, but if they're going to play them, at least they play them at home.
Yeah, and the Indiana game is also at home for them.
Yep.
So by the looks of it, their three toughest opponents are at home. They do play, a bunch of teams that, spoiler alert, like we have in the middle of the pack. They don't play any of my bottom three. But I think it'll just be another typical Iowa season. They'll win a game that they probably are 9 to 10 point underdogs in, whether it's a road game against a team of similar caliber or a home game against one of the big dogs, and they'll lose a game 13-10 to a team that they're better than. I think it's probably 8 wins, just a really hard schedule. You're not going. They only have one road game in a cold environment past October 11th, which I think is a little bit of a detriment to them because that makes offense easier. But yeah, that's under for me, Joe, and I'm going to throw them in 10th in my power rankings.
Yeah, Sean, I wouldn't be shocked if they went 7-5, and I think the offense could improve and the defense could take a step back. Let's assume they lose all those 3 games we talked about, and I'm including Iowa State, so that's 4. So Indiana, Iowa State, Penn State, Oregon, and then I'll say of those 4, I think they'd beat Oregon at home. That's just my crazy prediction. If I had to make one down, we'll analyze that as we go on through the year. But going to USC, going to Nebraska is not going to be an easy task. And with that said, Sean, I have them one spot above you. I have them dead in the middle of the pack, 9. I think probably they go 8-4, like you said, but a 7-5 season could be on the cards without them being any different from last year. But I think, short of them winning 9 to 10 games, Iowa fans won't be on a fire Kirk train, but they might be just seeing how this is going out. They might just want to. I hate regime change or a coaching change is such a powerful phrase, but I think they might just tell Kirk, kind of relax a bit and perhaps kind of like their basketball team who dismissed McCaffrey after a while. Maybe they want some new blood in the entire athletic department in their two of their 3 biggest sports. So very interesting year for the Hawkeyes, I think.
And this isn't our basketball preview, but they did make that change, and the philosophy of the new coach is pretty much a 180 from McCaffrey. Perhaps that could be coming to football too soon if he can get somebody else in there and score some points. But, yep, going to be another Iowa season for the Hawkeyes. All right, up next, Joe, we got the Maryland Terrapins. Mike Locksley is back for another year, a team that did struggle quite a bit last year. They do lose Hemby to Indiana. Billy Edwards is not their quarterback anymore, I don't think. And, sorry, trying to pull up the Maryland schedule here. And, Joe, this is a team that I could see struggling. Not going to put it any other way. I think they're a contender for last place. And I think it's going to be a tough one in College Park.
Yeah, I think, Rolly got a first-time starter in Malik Washington. I bet they throw the UCLA transfer Justin Martin in there a few times. Locks is an offensive guy. I think they'll score points, but I'm not really a fan of losing Billy Edwards, who I thought was the best thing they had going for them last year to Wisconsin. I think him leaving, you could throw NIL, you could throw whatever you wanted to it. I think that's indicative of a program that might be a sinking ship. Now, I think with the way Mike Locksley's recruited this offseason, he's probably bought himself a 2026, barring this thing going completely off the rails. And how that goes off the rails is pretty early if they lose to FAU, Northern Illinois, who, by the way, they beat the national runner-up, so I wouldn't necessarily sleep on that game. And then Towson. I think there's an opportunity to start 3-0, and then they go to face their former quarterback in Madison week 4. But barring that shot, I think there's going to be very few conference games they'll be favored in. I think for them to kind of stay afloat, they'll have to win a game at home they're not supposed to. And I'm not even saying like, I mean, luckily for them, they don't play Ohio State, Penn State, or Oregon. They avoid also, kind of some other dangerous teams there. They don't play Illinois, for example. They do got to play Indiana. Oh, sorry, they do play Illinois. They do got to play Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, but they do avoid, I guess, kind of the big three threats in Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State. So could be a positive there, but I don't think this team wins necessarily more than 4.5 games, which is what their over under is, right?
I think when you have like good quarterback play and you're still a bad team in college football nowadays, I think that's just a really bad sign. I think there's they don't play like another team way at the bottom of our power rank or my power rankings at least at home. Those middle of the pack teams like UCLA and Rutgers, Wisconsin at on the road, and Michigan State is at home. Like, I don't think their schedule is really lining up for them to like scrap out a 6-6 season here without being very good. So I think it's under Joe. I do think it goes off the rails, and I've got them in last.
Man, I think they scrape out. I think perhaps they start 3-0 and they scrape out a game at home, perhaps against the Washington or Nebraska. They could steal a UCLA on the road. I'd be surprised. Maybe if Rutgers is down, but I'm struggling to find the over there shot. I think they do go 4-8. I think they're just under. I have them at 16th. I think they're going to be an annoying 4-8 team to play because I think Mike Locksley, I think, is a pretty good coach. I just think with Maryland, especially with this new AD, who, by the way, I know he hired Buzz, but just as a whole, he's got a lot to prove. And that's why I don't love Locke's job security. If I had to bet, I think if they went 5-7, they give him one more year due to the recruiting. But Sean, this is a program that needs to get some momentum, and I just don't see a lot coming from 2025. So I have them going 4-8 and in 16th place.
Yeah, the first four Big Ten games aren't the toughest. I think that's one top half team in my power rankings, and two of them are at home. Like, there's a way they win two of those four, and they have an all right season, but there is also a way that they win none of those four, and then they play a ranked Indiana, and then they go on the road to Rutgers in Illinois. Then they have the two Michigan schools. So I think an optimistic look at this is tough for me. So I've got them in last. All right, we'll go down the list, Joe, and staying with the M's, we're going to go to Michigan State. Jonathan Smith, year 2. Aiden Childs, Nick Marsh, back looking for breakout seasons. What do you got for the Spartans?
I think this is probably one of the most interesting teams in the league. I think year one, it's really unfair, Michigan State fans, to knock Jonathan Smith because of the success his other first year head coach, Kurt Cignetti, had. And I know people say, oh, well, Jed Fish made a bowl game. I think that's pretty disingenuous as well. I think Michigan State kind of got crippled pretty early on, even in that FAU game to open the year, when they lost, like it felt like half their secondary. So I think Jonathan Smith's track record speaks for itself. I think this indication he's on the hot seat year 2 is quite ridiculous, even with this new athletic director that they have from
Yeah.
um, Georgia Tech. So I think that's pretty ridiculous. I think it's a workable schedule, to be honest, Sean. I think the goal for Michigan State this year is to continue to progress. I think at a bare minimum they have to go 6-6, probably 7-5, for fans to really invest. I know kind of bigger local Detroit, Michigan State guys want them to go eight wins and beat a Michigan, beat a team they're not supposed to. I think the offensive talent is there. I love Nick Marsh. I think Jack Velling is an NFL tight end. I think Childs really has to get his turnovers down, and I know he did it the second half of the year, but that's because their offense kind of handcuffed him, and I don't think that was a great idea, to be honest, Sean. I think this guy is a really elusive playmaker. I think he can run with his legs. I think he's like that Iowa game. If he does that on a consistent basis, this could be a team that surpasses that 5.5 by maybe 3.5. Like maybe they go 9-3. That's not necessarily my prediction, but if Aiden Childs plays to the potential that a lot of Michigan State fans get ripped on at the Reds for, he has potential. If he performs on that, I think this team can be really good. Look at the schedule here, Sean. Um, they do have two really tough road games to open conference play, USC and Nebraska. They do have a bye sandwich between there, luckily. They go to Indiana, go to Minnesota. Luckily, their two biggest games are at home. Penn State and Michigan get those two at home. So, if they won one of those and went 7-5, I think fans would probably be really happy. So, I think though their road games are going to be probably what's going to be the difference between being a 6-6 versus an 8-4, 9-3, and really everyone wondering what they're up to in 26.
Yeah, of their 5 Big 10 road games, I think like they'll only be serious underdogs in one, maybe two. Like there's a way that they win two road games and three home games, and you know that would be an 8-4 season if you take care of business in the non-conference. And you have the return Boston College game from last year. Obviously, that was a road game. The Boston College was not terrible last year. This isn't an ACC pod, but Michigan State should take care of business there. So I think 8 is a lofty but feasible goal for the Spartans. And Joe, I've got them. Actually, you can go first for this one.
Yeah, one negative thing I'll say about Michigan State is I think the defense might take a step back. They lost a lot of transfers. Even losing a Dylan Tatum. I know he played one game. You're losing him to Northwestern. You lose Maverick Hansen on the O line. They do bring back the. I think they've praised their O line D line depth a lot in the offseason. I think this team goes where if that D line depth is for real and the O line takes a more than marginal step forward, I think this team could win 8 games. Sean, one thing I'll say is the only way this goes completely off the rails is if they lose to BC week 2 at home. I think that would be a very poor sign for the program as a whole. I don't see that happening. I think they do have to win some road games they're not supposed to for fans to also feel confident. It's one of the more interesting teams because I think there's very expectations for the fan base. The absolute floor is bowl game. And I think a lot of fans really do want the 7-9 wins that Mark D'Antonio would probably get with a team like this. Let's just call it what it is. So, Sean, I have Michigan State kind of at the bottom end of the middle, I'd say. I had them at 11th. I think this is a really talented team. I think outside of Jeremiah Smith, Ryan Wingo, and Ryan Williams, was one of the better freshman receivers we saw in college football last year. I think he's an absolute playmaker. I think the running game really needs to get going this year for the Spartans. So, with that shot, I have Michigan State going 7-5. I don't know whether they pick off one of those games they'll really want, which is a Michigan, Penn State, or maybe upsetting a USC or Nebraska on the road. But I do think they take care of the games, unlike last year that they're supposed to at home, and probably win one of those difficult road games we mentioned. So 7-5 for the Spartans, and they return to a bowl game.
Joe, not all that different for me. I think 7-5 is probably the most likely record. I've got them 2 spots lower in 13th. I just think there's a little bit more consistency out of some of these teams in the middle. Even though we know some of the players from Michigan State, and if they do get more consistent, then they can definitely get into the top half of the league. I think I'm just going to have them just on the wrong side of the halfway line. All right, we'll keep it moving, Joe. Your Michigan Wolverines, 14th ranked in the preseason. Obviously, a lot of off-the-field stuff there with Sharon Moore missing the first 2 games of the season. Suspension related to the
weeks 3 and 4.
Oh, weeks 3 and 4. Sorry, 2 games.
You're all good.
Not the first 2 games of the season. Bryce Underwood is in town, not officially named QB1 yet, but it certainly looks like that's going to happen, right?
Yeah, if you're paying a guy $12 to $20 million over the next 3 years, he is starting.
So the schedule, you have another one of those SEC non-conference games. We saw the Texas Longhorns go up to Ann Arbor last year. It's down to Norman this year. I believe Oklahoma comes up next year, and then Texas down to Texas the year after.
Yep.
So one of the probably one of the premier non-conference games in the league. With 9 conference games, teams are not really doing that anymore. You go on the road to Nebraska early. You go to L.A., but just 2 ranked teams on the schedule overall. Obviously, that would be the defending champion Ohio State Buckeyes on the last day of the year in Ann Arbor. But, Joe, Michigan wants to get back to Michigan football here and make the college football playoff. It seems like the schedule is. That's certainly possible with the schedule, and that might come with a big win early in week 2.
Yeah, I think the big prevailing story shot is now that this kind of cloud of the hammer is completely gone, aside from the donors who got to pony up 20 to 30 million. We don't need to get into that on this podcast. Is now it's kind of the Bryce Underwood era for real. He's going to be named the starter. The biggest question is the addition of him and Chip Lindsey, the offensive coordinator they got from North Carolina, is those two will those two additions really improve the offense? I think the offense will definitely take a marginal step forward.
It's
It's
gotta.
a matter, yeah, it's a matter of is the offensive line, which is Sharon's calling card, does that really improve? And then the defense, which I think people are confident in Wick Martindale, does the defense not take a step back or a massive step back? I think it's very possible they will, at least a step back with Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Will Johnson gone from the team. I think this team has to run the ball. If they run the ball well, it opens up so many facets for Bryce's legs. The intermediate passing game, which I think Bryce is going to excel in. And I think the deep ball is really going to be the big question for Bryce. I think you look at the schedule, and I see predictions vary from 8-4, maybe some pessimists are 7-5 to 10-2. I think that's probably about right. If I had to put a range on it, I'd say 7 to 10 wins. The biggest concern shot is does Bryce Underwood week 2 get spooked or week 4 get spooked in Norman or Lincoln? And how does that affect the rest of the year? You look at that schedule from, I think, from the Oklahoma to Michigan State game. If you could come out of that with only 1 or 2 losses, you're in really good position to make the playoff. I know inevitably you play Ohio State, but based on their success in the last few years, I don't think it's a team that if they had to win, if they were a 9-2 heading into that game, that they're going to be frightened or unlikely in their heads to win. So the biggest question is, can Bryce really streamline the improvement of this offense fast? Because Norman and Lincoln, weeks 1 through 4, are not necessarily a generous baptism. And then the other question is, can this team win a road game? I know they won the Ohio State game last year, but it was a team that really struggled on the road. And let's face it, Sean, all the games Michigan's lost since 2019, they failed to score the first touchdown. Michigan is a team that has to jump on you early because of the way they play football. And if they do, they're often in a good place. Michigan, the biggest key for them is starting games this year. If they can get ahead, stay ahead, this is a team that can absolutely return to the college football playoff. Before I give my prediction shot, I kind of rambled there. Is there anything you want to add before we get into it?
Yeah, I think we'll learn whether last year was sort of a product of a tough schedule and some unfortunate, things don't go your way, or whether the roster was truly, that bad. The team, obviously, you got 2 huge wins in there, Alabama and Ohio State, but there were a lot of games against high-quality competition that weren't close. So, and there still was a lot of NFL talent on that team last year. So, are they able to take that step up into the top of the league? Probably not, but you don't have to do that anymore to make the college football playoffs. So, 10-2 certainly gets you there, I think. If those 2 losses do come to the 2 ranked teams, one of them's going to be on the road in the SEC, the other one's going to be to a team that might be number 1 overall. But I certainly see them rolling in the middle of their schedule. I think even if they take a loss in Norman or in Lincoln, I think there's a path for some real confidence building there from the Wisconsin game on October 4th to Maryland. I think they can run that table and win a lot of games, probably by a lot of points. It sort of feels to me, Joe, take the Oklahoma game out, it feels a lot like Indiana's schedule last year. There's a big one at the end that obviously you'd want to get, but there's a great chance that they're putting themselves in a place where they'll be in no matter what happens in Ann Arbor on November 29th. And that sort of was the opposite last year when Ohio State was there, and obviously that Michigan team upset them in Columbus. So, Joe, I've got Michigan in 4th, and I think that is the last of the 4 teams from the Big Ten that do make it to the 12 team.
Yeah. I want to make something crystal clear. there's absolutely no way Michigan can start 2-2 and have the fan base is backing. Michigan's fan base is a very passionate fan base, but they will turn on you if you start 2-2. I just want to make that so clear to anyone who's listening, just someone who lives in Metro Detroit, went to the school, and who's been a fan my whole life. 2-2 is unacceptable. You have to win Norman or Lincoln for this fan base to really get behind you, barring you run the table after you go 2-2, which I don't think would be likely if you lost those two games. I'm just going to be upfront with
But
you.
Joe, I don't think 3-1 going into that Wisconsin game is the end of the world.
No, I think anything 3-1 or better, at least me, I'm more than happy. I think this team shot ultimately goes 8-4. I think they underperform a bit, but I don't think it's a disaster. I think the only way that 8-4 is a disaster is if they lose to Michigan State, something we talked about last year. There's a lot of teams like Nebraska, Washington, Michigan State on this schedule as well, USC too, that are kind of in like years they got to step up, and Michigan's playing all three of those teams. I think if they lost to two of those three teams, that'd be a real disappointment. And I can include Oklahoma, even though they're outside the Big Ten. They're playing four teams that kind of need to make a big jump this year to really get the fan base back and surging to the way it was in 2023, at least for Michigan. So I think they win two of those four games, even if they, miss the playoff, go 9-3. I think that'd be a pretty good season for the Wolverines. With that said, Sean, I have them at eighth. I
Wow.
think for now,
Huh.
I think for now, 8-4 is my expectation. I think if they win in Norman, and Oklahoma will be the best D line they play up till Ohio State. If they win in Norman running the ball effectively against them, maybe we're talking 10-2, 11-1. But I don't. Michigan traditionally does not do well on the road. Barring, I know everyone's say Ohio State and the 23 Natty team. Michigan does not do well on the road traditionally, especially with true freshman QBs. So I'm gonna say 8-4 and be conservative.
You had, I don't know if the line is out yet, but you seem to be thinking that the Oklahoma game, they'll be going in big underdogs.
Not big. I think they're only 2.5 to 3.5 varying books, but I think John Mateer, and we'll get into it later. I don't want
Yeah.
to ramble. John Mateer at Oklahoma, Jaden Ott are going to be a little too much for RD, and I don't think we'll score enough points against Venables.
Interesting. I think this team goes 10-2 and makes it, and I don't know if they're actually like going to be as good as the ranking that they have, but because they're Michigan and because they won a lot of games, I think they'll probably be given the benefit of the doubt. Um, I really do like it. It really is unfortunate that Oklahoma game is week 2, because if it was a, you know, Idaho or something there, and even, I know non-conference games are usually early, but even if that was in the middle of the season, there's a great chance to build some confidence there in October and November. And, Michigan, they do need sort of the game script to go their way. I don't think they're coming back from down 17 in the fourth quarter
No.
and stealing a game, but the way that they win is they lead early, they go start to finish, and they shut the door. And I can see that happening quite a bit here. I think they're playing a lot of teams in the middle and lower part of this league, and when confidence builds and rolls, we saw it in Bloomington last year. So I think that Michigan will have a similar type of season.
Yeah,
All right,
and
Joey.
one last thing, Sean, let's go to
Yeah.
Minnesota, but I will say that is exactly why the big game, why Michigan got off. I'll just be upfront about it from that NCAA thing. Let's just acknowledge the elephant in the room. But let's go to Minnesota. Sorry about that, Sean.
All right, we've got PJ Fleck and the Golden Gophers. They're not on Michigan's schedule, so I got to go back to the standings to find it. But Joe, an interesting year for the Golden Gophers up there in Minneapolis. Last year was sort of a mixed bag. And why is Michigan's schedule coming up? I clicked Minnesota. All right, well, Joe, they've got quite a bit of question marks coming in. They do have a ACC team on the road in the non-conference, similar to what they hosted North Carolina last year. They start off with Buffalo and Northwestern State. They go on the road to Cal. They do have at Ohio State. They do go to Kinnick. They do go to Oregon. What do you see here happening for the Golden Gophers?
I think they have a really good running attack. I like the returning production. I think they're over 50%. They're one of, I believe, 5 or 6 teams with that from last year. It's going to go where Drake Lindsey goes. I think teams will stack the box against Darius Taylor. And by the way, huge credit to Darius Taylor. I know he had to have been getting poached in the portal. Let's just call it what it is, Sean. I'm not a fan of it, but it's definitely happening. For him to stay there, huge credit to him. But getting off that, uh, if Drake Lindsey steps it up, they've kind of had middling to good QB play of late. I think, Brosber was good enough at certain times. They had Athan Manis, who we'll kind of get into later, and then they had the Tanner Morgan years as well. I think if he performs to that standard, this could be an interesting team depending on how the defense goes. The schedule's workable for what their expectation is. What's their over under shot? I believe 6.5, 7.5.
I'll have to pull it up, but that
Yeah,
seems. I think 7-5 is my early prediction, so that would seem right.
Yeah, I don't see them going into the horseshoe or Oregon and really making any noise. What I do see is a team that hopefully in these road games can step it up. I think there's a small chance they could go undefeated at home. I don't see any home game they won't be favored in. Going to Northwestern, uh, going to Iowa, I don't think it's in particular that startling for them, especially given Northwestern's status. I think this is a team that could do a typical PJ Fleck overperform, going 8-4, 9-3, win a bowl game. Wouldn't shock me at all if Minnesota did that. It also wouldn't shock me if they were a team that was struggling to make a bowl game. This is a team that I think could go anywhere. I think probably they land in the middle and go like 8-4, which I think would be a success. I know it's frustrating with our running backs they have. I think this is a team that could have scored a lot of points. If Drake Lindsey steps up, maybe this could be a dark horse. 9-3, 10-2, potentially a Big Ten title game threat. I don't want to say that because I think they have two auto losses with Ohio State, and Oregon, but maybe a team that goes a really good 8-4 and 9-3, and that's kind of where I see them.
Yeah, 6.5 is where I'm seeing this right now.
I'd bet the over, to be
Um,
honest. I think they get
yeah,
to at least 7-5.
this article has them going 8-4. I think the Cal and Iowa games are big. I think certainly games they could win, but also especially for Iowa, Iowa's going to be thinking that they've got to win that game too. It's in the end of October, so by then we're thinking about where potential college football playoff push or bowl game push or you know save the season push. But they get I like the fact they're playing their third non-conference game is their tough one. It's a road game in a power conference team, but again, one that I think they should win. I'm not super into Cal football, but they weren't very good last year. They were, and then they weren't, and they get Rutgers, they get Northwestern and Wisconsin to finish up. I think 7-5, 8-4 is certainly attainable here, Joe, and I think the middle of the pack is probably where they're headed.
I agree, Sean. With that said, I kind of have them at the tail end of the middle of the pack. I have them in 12th, so kind of like that two-thirds line in the conference. And like I said, they have the running backs going for them. They have PJ Fleck going for them. Just starting practically a redshirt freshman at quarterback is why I have the big questions. Because for them to overperform, they're going to have to win one of those, like you said, games at Cal, games at Iowa. And, they'll have to fend off teams kind of equal to them or a little better. Like Michigan State, I think, is probably the Spider-Man image overall as a team, and they play them. So I think that'd be a really good test to see where they're at in comparison to the rest of the league.
Yeah, that's our first unanimous selection, Joe. I've got them in 12 also. They're going to be an interesting year up there for the Golden Gophers. All right, two left here in part one, Joe. We've got Nebraska up next. Dylan Raiola is back for year two. What started off really hot ended really cold last year for the Cornhuskers. But Joe, a certain, a tough finish for them last year. Obviously, they're going to hope to start hot again. They start the year Cincinnati on a neutral. Think it's an Arrowhead. I have to double check.
It is, yep.
And then Akron, Houston Christian in the non-con before the Michigans. And then Michigan schools at home, Maryland, Minnesota on the road, Northwestern at home. They play both LA schools, one at home, one on the road. Really, to me, their only auto loss of the year being at Penn State on November 22nd. But, Joe, what do you got here for Nebraska?
It's funny. A lot of Matt Rule teams took a big jump year two. For Nebraska, it was marginal. They went from a 5-7 to a 7-6, which was improvement. I know they rushed the field and everyone's made fun of them for that. But at the end of the day, Matt Rule, whether you like him or not, he progresses teams. He did that at Temple. He did that at Baylor. The only place he didn't do that was the NFL, but I'm not going to judge him harshly for that. The one glaring weakness of this team, I like the receivers. I like Key, who they added in the portal. I like Rayola. I think their O line takes a step forward. The defensive line being decimated with the departure of the line coach is going to come back to bite them at some point. Now, does that mean they go off the rails? I think the only way Nebraska goes off the rails, Sean, is if they pull a Nebraska choke, which was more typical of the Scott Frost years. I'm not going to attribute that to Matt Rule, but if they lose week one at Arrowhead, which is going to be played on Thursday night, perhaps you're listening to it on Thursday morning, that's unacceptable for Nebraska. I'm just going to be upfront. There's a touchdown favorites, simply unacceptable if they lose to
Yeah, they got to
Cincinnati.
win that.
Yeah. Other than that, I do think this is a team that could float around 7 to even 10 wins. I think they're kind of have Michigan's ceiling, to be honest. I think this is a team that can be a sleeper for the college football playoff. I don't see any games, even the Michigan game, the 3-point dogs. I don't see any games that are going to be more than like a 5.5 point dog, aside from the Penn State game at Happy Valley. And, to be honest with you, the way they played at Ohio State last year was one of their highlights. Maybe they make that game close. I think Rayola needs a big step up year two for them to be a playoff contender or to be a Big Ten title game contender, which is probably the next. I think that's two steps from where they are now. Right now, they're a bull middling team, and I think they need to get to a good team before they become that playoff contender in year three of Dylan Rayola. But certainly could happen this year with this schedule. Sean, before I keep going, is there anything you want to add before we get into predictions and whatnot?
7.5 wins is the line. I think that's an over for me. I think they're probably underdogs in 2 of their 12 games right now.
Yeah.
I think they're favorites at Maryland. They're favorites at Iowa. Or sorry, Iowa at home. UCLA
Yeah, they are
on the
favorites,
road.
3-point favorites. Yep.
The Minnesota one is one that will probably be close to even, at least as of now. But I think if you're looking at this for Nebraska, I think you want to be going to Maryland with 1 loss.
I agree, Sean. I think
And if you do, I think that's good.
they could honestly, Sean.
They might go with 0.
Yeah, that's exact. I think there is a small chance, not small. There's a significant enough chance to me that they could go into that Penn State game 10-0. I really mean that. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Nebraska went to that game with, and maybe it's a game where they're 9-1, they lose that game, and all they have to do is beat Iowa week 12 to get into the playoff. That could be very real. Reality is, I see them over, but I see them kind of in the Illinois-Indiana department. I think Nebraska's really good. I think they're really well coached. I think that D-line is going to hurt them. Like, if they get behind in games against teams that can run the ball, particularly against the Michigan or even a USC, that could be very bad for the Cornhuskers. So I think they go 9-3. I think they drop a game they shouldn't. I think they lose a game at Happy Valley, and I think maybe they lose one of these push games, like against the Minnesota or even a USC, who I guess we'll talk about in the next episode. But I think Nebraska gets to 9-3. I think they get to 10 wins. Like, whether that's my bold prediction. Nebraska gets to 10 wins, whether that's through an additional win in the bowl game, or maybe they go 10-2 and are just out of the playoff, or into the playoff. But with that schedule, 10-2, I'd say probably gets them in, but maybe gets them on the edge. So if they got pushed out at 10-2, I think it's more to the fact that, let's face it, they're playing 2 ranked teams. That'll like, I don't see anyone else on the schedule finishing the year ranked outside of perhaps Michigan State or USC, who surprises people.
All right, Joe. Well, I've got Nebraska in 7th. I think that they could join that pack of a team that is probably the 15th or 16th best team, but they won enough games so they sneak into the back of the college football playoff. But I think they'll go to Happy Valley, where if they're going to that game, and if they win, they'll be in. Obviously, that's not likely, but I think they'll be. I think they should be a ranked team. I think they will be at some point this year. I just think they'll probably come 1 game short of the college football playoff. I've got them in 7th.
Yeah, I have them in 10th, and it's funny because I predicted Iowa to have a worse record than them. If I could do tied for 9th, that's what I would honestly do. The only reason I'm ranking Iowa above, because I know a lot of Nebraska fans view that as a big rivalry, is because I trust Phil Parker and Tim Lester more. I know Dana Holgorsen's on, I guess, year two or full year one as OC for Nebraska, but I think the fact you have a new DC and that D line is why I'm just going to rate them slightly below at Iowa.
All right, up next, Joe, and the last one here on episode or part one is the Northwestern Wildcats. Uh, Coach Braun back for year three. We've got a pretty tough schedule for the Wildcats. They start on the road at Tulane, and then they host Oregon early. They go to Penn State. They go to Illinois. They host Michigan. They go to Nebraska. They go to USC. They do have Purdue on their schedule, Joe, but other than that, it's a tough one.
Yeah, you add Preston Stone from SMU. Um, I think that's probably an upgrade. I don't think I'm gonna be honest, Sean. I don't know how to define success for the Wildcats. I think year one, David Braun massively overperformed by getting them to a bowl game with the whole Pat Fitzgerald fiasco, and the fact they had that kind of was a letdown year two. I think though year two is more indicative of the state that program's in. Rebuilding the stadium. They're playing a lot of games on that makeshift stadium, and then they're playing bigger games like against Michigan, for example, at Wrigley. So this is a team. Honestly, I think bowl game is just not attainable. I think the fact that they're more like a touchdown dog against Tulane kind of speaks to the state of that program. I do think the goal for Northwestern should be to not lose a dumb game like a West Illinois. I think UCLA, UL Monroe, and Purdue are games at home that you could win. So perhaps getting to the precipice of bowl berth, like 5 wins, I'd give David Broad a lot of credit. And then maybe they could upset, maybe they upset a USC, give Nebraska a scare. I don't think Oregon or Michigan upsets are in the cards quite yet for the Wildcats. So. Sean, it's hard to call Northwestern anything but probably a bottom three team in this conference. Most power rankings, not just ours, are going to have them there. And, kind of unfortunate. But I think, there is optimism. That new stadium, I think their facilities are top notch. I think, maybe they get a good recruiting class in there, a good transfer class. And perhaps, maybe the Wildcats could be what they were from, 2014 to 2020.
Is that stadium ready? It's not, right?
No, that's going to be completed in 2026.
Okay, yeah. So honestly, that might help them because that soccer lacrosse field gets real windy on the river, and maybe they can, some rain, some snow comes in. Maybe they can find a way to beat a team that they shouldn't. But yeah, the line is 3.5, Joe, and I think the fact that they have like one of their three non-conference games is real. Certainly, if you give them UL Monroe and Western Illinois, they just need to find two other wins to get over that. And
I
I
think
think
they could beat Purdue at home.
yeah, and well, that's one, and then they got
Yeah.
to get another one. So I think they do finish 3-9, and I think if you're trying to build a program, and I don't know when this Tulane agreement was made, but you can give yourself 3 wins in college football, and
Absolutely.
week one on the road. I mean, I know it's a nationally televised game on ESPNU. I just don't know what they were thinking there, and I think it will be tough for them, Joe. I've got them in 16th.
Yeah, I have Northwestern Sean at 17. I think they're just one shy, and they're playing a team that, spoiler alert, is 18. So maybe they get to. Maybe I really think success would be 5 wins, to be quite real, Sean. If they
I
got
think it
five
might be
wins,
it might be 4.
if they got to 4 or 5 wins, I think broad overall for the year, as like expectation wise, would probably get like a B. Like I'd be like, that's not bad considering what he's working with. I think probably the ceiling for them is that they put a scare into an Oregon for a half, maybe a scare into Michigan for the first half of that game at Wrigley, which is going to be majority Michigan fans. Let's call it what it is. So I think Northwestern gets over. I think David Broad's got some coaching chops. I think they go 4-8, which I know is not great, but it gets them over the Vegas expectation. I think they pick off, Minnesota at home, or maybe they pick off, a road team kind of sleeping on them. So give me the Wildcats to go 4-8. 17th in the conference. I don't think David Braun in any reasonable world should be on any type of hot seat. If he is, that's pretty stupid. And I think the AD would be a pretty stupid person, barring them hiring some guy that's really like above him, which no offense to Northwestern, I don't think quite yet they're there. I think in 2 years, Northwestern will be having a different conversation, whether Braun's the coach or not, because I think that this like 3 year period they had to get through after the scandal with Fitzgerald, and then as they're upgrading that stadium.
Yeah, I think we're talking 1 or 2 years from now is when they'll start to expect to win some games. And unfortunately for them, or maybe fortunately for them, this is the year that they have a tough schedule. You take the losses, take the nationally televised games against, Penn State and Oregon and Michigan and Illinois, and maybe you'll find yourself in a better spot financially in a couple of years. But all right, Joe, that wraps up part one of our Big Ten preseason sort of preview, Power Rankings 1. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to check us out next time.